Hello, and welcome back to another episode of The Reborn Experience. I'm your host, Wolff, and this week marks a new journey. For the next 7 weeks, we'll be reading through the book of James in the New Testament. And on today's episode, we'll be talking about trials and building spiritual endurance and maturity in James chapter 1, verses 1 through 12. Starting in James chapter 1, verse 1, it states, James, a bondservant of God and of the Lord Jesus Christ, to the 12 tribes who are dispersed abroad, greetings. Context would be nice. So James is the half-brother of Jesus. Now, what do I mean by the half-brother of Jesus? Well, Jesus was born from the Virgin Mary, and he has what you can call an earthly dad in Joseph. Joseph was Mary's husband, although Joseph never physically or sexually played a role in creating Jesus. The Holy Spirit impregnated Mary as a virgin, which is a miracle in itself. That is the miracle of Jesus right off the bat, being born from a virgin, a woman who had never had sex at that point in time. And so when Mary became pregnant, when her and Joseph were engaged, Joseph quietly left or separated because at that time Joseph didn't know. And so Joseph reasonably thought, oh, well, Mary and I haven't had sex, but she's pregnant, so therefore she had to have cheated on me. I'm not okay with that, but I also don't want to embarrass her in front of the town either. So he did so quietly, which I also respect, but and then eventually Joseph comes to find out, no, this is the future Messiah, Emmanuel. So, yes, Jesus' mother is Mary, being brought up through her womb and being conceived by Mary. And yes, Joseph was his dad, but wasn't at the same time. Joseph was his mother's husband and cared for Jesus and nurtured him as a boy, but didn't play the part in actually creating him. Whereas James was created by Joseph and Mary. So ultimately that's where we get the half brother. So the author of the book of James is James, the half brother of Jesus. And now when James says to the 12 tribes who are dispersed abroad, greetings. Now this comes because when the kingdom split after King Solomon's reign, now King Solomon, author of the book of Proverbs, as well as a few other books in the Old Testament, after the kingdom split, after Solomon's reign, so there's 10 tribes that made up the northern part of the kingdom. 10 of the 12 tribes made up the northern part of the kingdom. And then you have the tribes of Benjamin and Judah. Those two combined to form the southern part of the kingdom, which is called Judah. One thing I forgot to add was that those 10 tribes in the northern part of the kingdom, that is Israel. And then you have Judah, the southern part of Solomon's kingdom, consisting of Benjamin and Judah, those two tribes. So you have these 12 tribes. They split after Solomon's reign. There's a lot of persecution, the Romans taking Jews as slaves. And so James is speaking to a lot of scattered people. These tribes no longer connected into one solid, strong kingdom, but they have split. And so James is speaking to this crowd of people. They are dispersed abroad all over the place. James 1 verse 2, consider it all joy, my brethren, when you encounter various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces endurance. So that was verses 2 and 3 right there. And verse 2 instructs us to consider it joy when we receive trials. And do you think that it's natural for you to have joy whenever a boulder is sitting in the middle of the road for you? metaphorically speaking, when a trial comes in your life, is it natural for you to just automatically find the good and the positive in it and be joyous about it? Or do your thoughts, hone in on the negative first? Which comes first? I read a book when I was 16, and it's called Beyond Grit. And I'm currently reading another book right now called Every Thought Captive. And those two books have been very, very crucial in helping me in my mind when something negative comes to flip the way that I perceive it, to perceive the said situation into a more positive thing. What is the good that can come from the bad? And if we just read scripture, there are reasons why things happen, and bad things can be used to accomplish good things. And sometimes we as believers also just have to suffer because that's what we're called to do at various times, because we don't go with the trends of the world. And so, when we encounter trials, we have to make a conscious commitment to face those trials with joy. And so in verse 3, I'll reread that one. It says, knowing that the testing of your faith produces endurance. First, we have the trial. And we are supposed to receive the trial with joy. The next step is the testing. We have the testing of our faith. And the testing of our faith produces endurance. So we have trial, then testing, and then endurance. Let's touch on the testing first, and then we'll get to the endurance. Every trial becomes a test of faith designed to strengthen. If the believer fails the test by wrongly responding, that test then becomes a temptation or a solicitation to evil. Right? And through these tests, a Christian will learn to withstand tenaciously the pressure of a trial. And I want to ask you a question. Can you think of a time in your life when you have faced a trial or a very difficult time? In that moment, you wish, I wish this would be taken away from me. I wish this cup would be taken. I wish I didn't have to go through with this anymore. Why me? This is so unfair. But then at some point during that trial, or maybe after the trial had already passed, you realized, I am a better person now than I was before this trial started. And it is the best thing that could have ever happened to me for this trial to have taken place. Because it made me realize something different. It made me stronger mentally. It made me stronger in my relationship with God. Maybe it even made me stronger physically because I started working out. Maybe it helped me understand someone else's perspective better. Maybe it pushed me to go through a new door that I otherwise would not have gone through. Or it forced me or encouraged me to close a current door that I would not have been willing to close otherwise. Have you experienced that in your life? Wow. So now we have endurance. We have the trial that comes. We're tested with that. And then from the testing, it produces endurance. So what does the endurance mean? If you run a 5K in under 20 minutes, I would say you have good endurance. If you can run a marathon in under 3 hours, I would say you have good endurance. What am I saying here? I'm saying that if you can run those longer distances in under those times, you have good endurance. Meaning, you can run a long distance and maintain a good pace and a good speed for that duration of time. That is endurance, is being able to maintain a good pace and a good speed for longer extents of time. It's not a sprint, where you're running 100 meters in, let's just say 9 to 12 seconds, and then you're done. This isn't a 10-second race. Okay, our life is a marathon. It's not a sprint, and I know that that's so cliche. But that's why endurance is so crucial. Yeah, there's times when it would be nice if we had the speed of a Ferrari. But over the course of our life, we need something reliable. Whether that's an SUV or a Camry, whatever. Something that's durable. Something that's going to last a while. Something that has endurance. Now let's go to verse 4. James 1 verse 4. And let endurance have its perfect result, so that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. One word that stands out to me in my translation, it might say something different in yours. In my translation, it says perfect. And let endurance have its perfect result. Does perfect mean literally perfect? For us, no, because we're still humans with human nature living on this earth. It doesn't mean sinless. We will continue to sin at times. But what perfect is referring to is a spiritual maturity. And so the testing of our faith, it drives us to a deeper and greater trust in Christ. And these qualities produce stable godliness and righteousness. And that ultimately ends up making us complete. And that spiritual maturity that we're talking about, that is so huge. And that spiritual maturity is produced by endurance. And that spiritual maturity in God's eyes is perfect. So that doesn't mean that we'll have a sinless life, but it does mean that we will have that spiritual and righteous maturity that the Lord is looking for. So that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. That is the way that verse 4 concludes. Lacking in nothing. You might be lacking in other ways. You might be lacking because you're only 5'9" and you wish you were 6'1", or you might be lacking because you have, I don't know, let's just say you only have $10,000 in your bank account and you wish you had $50,000 in your bank account. Whatever. You could be lacking in a lot of ways, but those are all earthly ways. We're talking about spiritual ways here, the things that ultimately matter. And on to verse 5, James 1:5. But if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives to all generously and without reproach, and it will be given to him. And this reminds us of King Solomon's requests in the book of Proverbs. The Lord comes to Solomon, and Solomon could have anything that he wants, but Solomon requests wisdom and discernment. Solomon wants to be able to be a fair judge of his people. And so instead of Solomon asking for the things that many other people would have asked for, if, let's just say God, or some of you might even say, if a genie, all right, if something came to you and said, I will fulfill any desire that you have, make any wish and it will come true. What is that wish that you wish for? And in this case, Solomon, a king, he could have asked to be the richest man in the world. He could have asked to be the most famous person in the world. Solomon could have asked to have been a great war hero. Solomon could have asked to have his enemies killed, or to have any woman he wants as his wife. Solomon asks for the things that are pleasing to God. He asks for wisdom. He asks to rule and judge his people fairly. And so God is pleased and he gives him those things. Plus God gives him riches and honor and a long life. And that's amazing. And so here in verse 5, but if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God. It's calling us to ask God for wisdom if we seek it. God, okay, finishing verse 5, says, quote, who gives to all generously and without reproach, and it will be given to him. I love that. I challenge you, ask the Lord for wisdom Ask the Lord to produce these things for you in your life. Verse 6, but he must ask in faith without any doubting, for the one who doubts is like the surf of the sea, driven and tossed by the wind. Ouch! But he must ask in faith without any doubting. So when you pray, it has to be with a confident trust in God. And I've been there. There have been times when I've prayed and I don't really know if God will actually deliver or not. I don't know. Sometimes when I pray, more so in the past, I would ask myself, am I actually praying to a God? Is there a God listening to me right now? Or am I just being weird and talking to myself? Am I being weird and talking to myself, or am I actually praying to a higher being? And over time, I've come to understand that there is a God, there is a higher being, and God is always listening to us. That doesn't mean that God gives me everything that I want on my time, my agenda, because that's not how it works. Everything is His will, His timing. But God is certainly listening to you. And so, verse 6 instructs us, ask in faith without any doubting. Because that person who doubts is like the surf of the sea, driven and tossed by the wind. Now, what does that mean? This is referring to someone who has some sort of inner moral conflict or distrust in God. And the surf of the sea, this person is someone who doubts God's ability or willingness to provide the wisdom. This person is moving back and forth with the endless tides and is never able to settle. And I don't think we want to be like that person, huh? Now, verse 7 goes on to say, for that man ought not to expect he will receive anything from the Lord. So verse 6 and 7 tie in very nicely together, saying that verse 6, you must ask in faith without any doubting. The person who doubts is like the surf of the sea, driven and tossed by the wind. And verse 7 states that if you are that person, don't expect to receive anything from all. Don't expect to receive anything from the Lord at all. Why? Because we're called to ask in faith. That's why. And verse 8 states, being a double-minded man, unstable in all his ways. What does double-minded man mean? This is someone whose mind or soul is divided between God and the world. This man could even be a hypocrite, someone who occasionally believes in God but fails to trust Him when trials come. So if you fail to trust in God when trials come, don't expect anything because your faith isn't genuine. Your faith isn't strong. Think about when Jesus was on the boat and all of his apostles were on the boat and a storm comes, or allow me to backtrack, okay? So the apostles are on the boat, they're on the lake, storm comes, boat's rocking, the apostles see Jesus walking on the water, and Jesus reaches his hand out and asks Peter to step off the boat and walk on the water to him. Now, that is one of the ultimate leaps of faith right there. Because again, people can't walk on water. But Jesus is asking Peter, walk on water. And so, and mind you, it's in the middle of the storm. And so Peter does so. And he's walking on the water initially, and then he loses faith. And he falls under. Jesus grabs him. And Jesus says to him, "Oh, you of little faith." And so the message to that story is, where is your faith when the storms in your life come? Verse 9, but the brother of humble circumstances is to glory in his high position. Humble circumstances and glory. This is someone who may not have much in this world, but they can still rejoice in the high spiritual standing that they have before God. So, humble circumstances, glory. I'll repeat one more time. Someone who may not have a whole lot of materialistic possession on earth. They may not have a lot to their name or a lot of impressiveness on their resume, but if you have a relationship with the Lord, that is something that you can absolutely brag about and boast in. And then verse 10, on the other hand, this is a message to the wealthy people of this world, the people who are well off. It says in verse 10, and the rich man is to glory in his humiliation, because like flowering grass, he will pass away. Rich man, glory in humiliation. This is another way of saying joy in trials, like we talked about in verse 2. Why? Well, because, first off, why would a rich man undergo trial? Well, no human being is free from trial whatsoever. And so, why in particular should a rich man find joy in their trials? Because these experiences help him rejoice and realize that genuine happiness and contentment depend on the true riches of God's grace, not earthly wealth. Absolutely. Your security and your safety is not on the things of this earth. So if you're a rich person and you lose a majority of your money because you got hacked or the stock market crashes or you made a bad investment or whatever the case may be, you don't have that anymore. So you don't have that tower that you had or that God that you had. So that God that you thought you once had is now a lot smaller than it used to be, or it's now non-existent like it used to be. So what are you going to do now? Or same thing, materialistic possessions. Whether you lose it while you're alive or you lose it when you're dead, either way you lose it and it's not forever. And that's not to say that it's a sin just by having those things, but it's the God that you make those things out to be, because your heart, like, that can't be the number one place for your heart to be, because it's not sustainable and it's not forever. And there's a Rick Ross song that I used to listen to a little bit when I was in like middle school, and it's called Money in the Grave. And the verse goes, when I die, I put my money in the grave. And then it goes on to say a lot of other explicit things. But when I die, I put my money in the grave. It has a nice ring to it, good flow, good voice. But when I listen to it now, it's actually really disgusting. And if he's being, and some people are going to say, Ian, relax. It's just a song. It's not that big of a deal. It's all fun. But the thing is, why are you making, like, if it's just a joke, why are you making a song about that? You know, if that's where your heart really is, you're saying when you die, you're going to put your money in the grave. Okay, if it's a joke, it's a joke. But what is that telling other people? I mean, it's pretty selfish to me. That's how it sounds. It's like, you have millions of, you have a lot of money that could do a lot of good, and you're just going to bury it, let it rot. You know what I mean? You know how many poor people you could give that to, or at least give it to your kids, you know, put that money in investments. There's a lot of other things you could do with your money than just bury it. So that's very much idolizing and making money and materialistic possessions your God. So let's move on to verse 11. Let's move on to verse 11. For the sun rises with a scorching wind and withers the grass, and its flowers fall off, and the beauty of its appearance is destroyed. So too the rich man in the midst of his pursuits will fade away. In verse 11, we have sun rising, scorching wind, the grass is withering, the flowers are falling off, and the beauty and the appearance of things are being destroyed. So the luscious green of the grass, it's now scorched. It's yellow and brown and gray. The flowers, the pretty variety of colors, same thing. Now they're all withered and shriveled up. Everything is withered and shriveled up and dying. Everything that was so beautiful that you could look at is now dying. And this can happen with anything in our nature. And verse 11 concludes by saying, so too the rich man in the midst of his pursuits will fade away. This is saying that everything is temporary. And that divine death and judgment can quickly end the wealthy person's dependence on material possessions. It's saying that materialistic possessions, they're temporary and fleeting, just like the grass and the flowers. And so too, another way we could take this is physical appearance as well. So we'll touch on that. Two things that are temporary and fleeting, just like the grass and the flowers. First and foremost is materialistic possessions and wealth. We've already discovered that. We can't take it with us when we're gone. And number two is our physical appearance. How many 80-year-old people do you know that looked that way when they were 20? And how many 20-year-old people do you know right now that would look that way when they're 80? And to any of you 80-year-old people who are out there maybe seeing this, you rock on. This is no shot at you. You know what I mean. Nobody when they're 80 is in their prime anymore. I'm young. I won't always be in my prime. One day, if I'm blessed enough, I'll make it to 80. And I'm not going to look this way. My body won't be able to do what it does right now. I'm going to have wrinkles on my face and things of that nature. I'm going to be a lot different when I'm 80. That's just how it is. And so the youth and the prime of our lives is only a small portion of our lives. And so physical appearance and youth, that is also temporary and fleeting, just like the grass and the flowers. And so there's a lot of things on this earth that we could seek and we could want, but does it last forever? No. What is forever then? That's the question. What is forever? Honestly, the only thing that's forever is our God, our Creator, Jesus Christ, the kingdom of heaven. That's the only thing that's forever. Nothing that we see on this earth is actually forever. Now, may we have a life that's blessed and we get to make many memories and cherish it. I'm not saying just live a miserable life because nothing matters here on earth. No, there's still many beauties of this earth. I'm saying don't place your God in something else other than God. Verse 12, blessed is a man who perseveres under trial, for once he has been approved, he will receive the crown of life, which the Lord has promised to those who love him. Blessed is the man who perseveres under trial. So in verses 1 through 12, what have we covered? First comes trials, and should you receive those trials with joy, the right mindset and the right attitude and actions? Should you receive your trials with joy and an optimistic perspective and putting the Lord first? You'll be tested, and with that testing produces endurance, and the endurance produces spiritual maturity and completeness, so you may lack nothing. Back to verse 12, persevering under trials. Once you have been approved, you will receive the crown of life, which the Lord has promised to those who love him. Now, the crown of life here in verse 12. So this could be a reference to athletes who were victorious in ancient Greek athletic events. They would receive a crown or a wreath placed on their head if they were the victor. And here, biblically, spiritually, this crown is our ultimate reward that the Lord has promised us for persevering through these trials. And we will receive this crown either at our earthly death or at Christ's second coming. So That is verses 1 through 12 in James 1. This is episode 83 and the first of our 7-week series through the book of James. Thank you guys for tuning in, and I can't wait to see you back next week for episode 84 as we conclude James chapter 1. God bless.
Watch what they say, but don't do what they do. Actions speak louder in spirit and truth. I'm built different. I'm built different. Watch what they say, but don't do what they do. Actions speak louder in spirit and truth. All gas, no brakes. Can't fight fake. Mind over matter. Faith, no cape. Some only complain.